You may have heard the legend of the Paperboy, a silly name to be fair, but no less unsettling when you understand its context. It's a lesser-known legend, told in a couple of the flyover states in the US. There are slight variants, of course, but this I heard personally from a reliable source, whose identity will be kept secret for security purposes, but someone local to the legend, who knows it inside and out, someone who lived it. It goes like this. Back in the 1940s, with the men away at war, a young boy, one Nathaniel Nate Cooper, wanted to help his mother and siblings by getting a job and earning some cash. It wouldn't be much, but it was still appreciated. Nate was working a paper round for a couple of months and was doing a good job overall. Though as winter set in, his behaviour started to change. Nate was acting tired and skittish, almost afraid to go outside. His mother, being concerned, asked just what was bothering him, and after some coaxing, Nate confessed that he believed he was being followed. While delivering papers, he would see to the houses around town first, before heading to the more remote properties within the local forest. Initially, things were fine. Nate had spent plenty of time in those woods, and so he felt safe enough. But lately, it was like something was watching him from within the trees. He caught glimpses, but it was so fast it moved swiftly from sight, as if it was just part of his imagination. Poor Nate, seeing strangers in shadows. He would ride back to town as fast as he could, and at the entrance of town, the sensation of being followed would stop, and he would feel safe. This naturally gave the lad a sense of comfort, believing that as long as he was in town, that he was secure, and that he was just jumping at misidentified sounds of nature. But now, he felt differently, as if whatever he was afraid of was getting braver, more ambitious, and was now following him into town. Those same shadows from the trees were now behind buildings and down alleyways, watching him and learning his routine, maybe even following him home. Now, Mrs. Cooper was a mother of two and a force to be reckoned with when it came to her children. Hearing her son's concerns, she feared a drifter had wandered into town and may well cause harm. She informed the local authorities and rallied a neighborhood watch together. After a month of diligent patrol and watchful eyes, nothing had occurred. Nate even began to regain his confidence and would ride through those woods with nothing ailing his passage other than the cold and residual snow. Things were partially back to normal. One day, Nate set out from home to make his rounds. An hour went by, then two, then several, and before too long, night was setting in. Mrs. Cooper, fearing the worst, called the authorities and asked anyone she could if they had seen her son. A search party was gathered. Police, neighbors, farmers, and some hound dogs scoured the woods. Some went on all night long, desperately searching for the boy. I'm sorry to say that poor Nathaniel Cooper was never found. There was no body, blood, or clothing found. His bike and his paper bag were gone. Even his bike tracks had been covered by the various vehicles passing through the area. There was quite literally no trace of the boy. The tragic disappearance of this young lad had shaken not only his family, the town, but all surrounding neighborhoods. There were no children allowed outside alone, and definitely not to deliver any more newspapers. This was the way of things for over 2 decades, and eventually, the tragedy of Nate Cooper became the legend of the Paperboy. As with all legends, facts have a way of being twisted and fictionalized. Over time, the mysterious disappearance of a local boy became tales of the boy's father having deserted the US Army, secretly returning home and kidnapping his son to unknown ends. More ludicrously, a monster living in the woods, waiting for the unsuspecting lad to ride past before capturing and eating him, taking his bike and papers home as trophies. Or Nate getting lost in the woods and now living out his existence riding through the forest dressed in old newspaper. Some even doubted the existence of Nathaniel Cooper altogether, claiming the whole story was made up and the town was too boring for anything that eventful. With such extravagant tales and understandable doubt, you can see why the event fell into obscure legend, which made for a convenient opening for vacancies in delivering newspapers. 13-year-old Benjamin Brooks took up the post in 1964. Despite some early hesitation, he took to the job well and found himself enjoying the round. Childhood friends of Benjamin alleged that at school he would recant them with tales of hearing strange noises while cycling through the forest, such as papers rustling in the wind and the echo of a ghostly bike chain rattling through the trees. Most accepted this as Benjamin attempting to earn himself a reputation at school, though later speculated he was also trying to dissuade others from taking a paper route themselves and cutting into his payment. However, as time passed on, his stories became more intense, and he told them with such conviction that they almost seemed genuine. But after a few months of hearing ghost stories, his friends just passed it off as Ben trying to up his game. One day came when he asked a few of his friends to join him, and he would even pay them for their trouble. They agreed, of course, but when the day came, each had to drop out last minute. It is said that Ben was hesitant to leave for his round that day, but did eventually make his way out. He was seen riding through town, dropping off papers as per usual, later riding out of town and towards the forest. This, sadly, was the last time he was seen. As with Nate Cooper, he had seemingly disappeared without a trace. No signs of a struggle or tracks discerning a possible direction he may have gone. There were, however, two significant differences in this case. Unlike Nate, Ben's bike was found, and so were the remaining papers that he hadn't delivered. Everything but Ben was there. In fact, there was an extra something left with the lad's belongings. 2 cut-out paper people tied to the bike, gently resting and with no trace of who left them. Save for one strange detail, the paper used seemed to be newspaper. Going from what could be deciphered from the information written on the paper figures, the dates corresponded with the same newspaper that Nate Cooper had been delivering on the day he disappeared, thus adding more to the legend surrounding Nate Cooper. But it didn't end there. As you can imagine, once again no one was pushing their children into taking up this seemingly cursed position. History repeated itself, and the legend continued. The details evidently became more inventive and over the years fell into obscure rumors that no one truly believed. Tales of a ghost boy lurking in the local woods, watching and waiting to steal away children making the rounds. A local game was even invented called Ghost Tracks, in which one or a group of kids would ride through the forest, daring the ghosts to stop them from delivering papers to remote houses. Once safely in town, they would ride back into the forest and count the tire tracks to see if the ghost boy was following them. It wasn't until 1979 that the paper round once again saw some younger blood, but this time it wasn't just one child who took up the job, but 3. Todd Wilson, as well as Pete Miller, both aged 13, and Marvin Ross, aged 12. Known to be close friends in their respective neighborhoods, they had apparently boasted a plan at school that if the 3 of them were to share the work, then they could keep each other informed of the ghost, if there was indeed one at all. Day by day, the boys took the paper round in turns. Weeks passed, and each of the boys would return home unharmed and unfazed. Since no one had come forward, it seemed as though everything was fine. This, unfortunately, was a lie. as one evening, while Todd and Peter had confessed to feeling uneasy and hearing strange noises while working. Not wanting to seem scared, since the others had said nothing, they had both brushed their distress aside and kept quiet. They agreed that they would both speak to Marvin the next day and see if he had experienced anything, and consider quitting the paper rounds altogether. I'm sorry to say that they would not get the chance, as the morning after Todd and Peter had admitted feeling unsettled and worried, Marvin was set to work. A local driver had reported seeing a boy fitting Marvin's description, sitting on his bike, newspaper bag and all, just on the town's border, staring out into the dimly lit woods, before pushing off and disappearing into the trees. His bike was discovered that evening, where 3 paper people rested in place of poor Marvin. According to Peter, who revealed all of this to his family and the police, Todd had approached him about the two going into the forest to search for Marvin, which reports state that Peter believed he had talked him out of this plan, and instead leaving the investigation up to the police. Unfortunately, eyewitnesses recall seeing Todd cycling out of town. His bike was found that same evening, now with 4 paper people tied to the bike. Peter for days would not leave his house, fearing he was next. Although, after some time, he felt that the danger he was facing was restricted to the forest, as this was where all of the disappearances had been. After 1 week of hiding at home, he ventured outside and returned home safely. The next day he went a bit further, and the same again the next day. Eventually, he was so confident that he was safe within the town's borders that one morning, when his mother needed some groceries, he offered to cycle down to the shop and collect them for her. She gave him enough for what she needed, and off he went. As time went by, his mother became worried that he hadn't returned home. Promptly, she called the local store and inquired as to whether her son had been in that day. Much to her distress, Peter had not been seen at the store at all. Not wasting any more time, Mrs. Miller made her way into town, asking for help from neighbors and other locals who heard her calling for Peter. Within an hour of making the call, Peter's bike was found down a side alley, a matter of feet away from the store he'd been heading for. 5 paper people tied to the bike. Once again, tragedy had struck, and no child would be delivering newspapers again. That was until January 2020, when one Jennifer Davis was eager to take the job and unafraid of old folk tales. The world had changed so much. Additional streetlights, a higher local population, mobile phones, etc. In a world where we are aware of so much, how could anything possibly escape our perception? But just as an extra precaution, and a bit of fun, Jennifer decided to wear a GoPro while working. Who knows, could end up on YouTube someday. Though advancement in technology and society weren't the only differences in Jennifer's story. For unlike all those who came before her, she didn't live within town, but in one of the remote properties built into the forest. So, things started well, but after some time of making her rounds, she too began to feel watched and followed. Feeling concerned, she took a few days off, and when she went back, everything seemed fine. No bad feelings, no mysterious sounds, no shadows moving through the trees or down dark streets. All was well again. Then came the next day. Jennifer got ready for her rounds, said goodbye to her parents, rode away from her house, and never came back. While her mother contacted the police, her father left the property to begin looking for her. But he wouldn't have to go far before making a grim discovery. For there, just on the outskirts of their property, was his daughter's newspaper bag, her bike, and 6 little paper people neatly tied to the handlebars. It had happened again. As always, there was no sign of a struggle, no tracks denoting where she might have gone, or idea of what had occurred in the disappearance of Jennifer Davis. Except for one thing. Buried within the newspapers of Jennifer's bag was her GoPro. This was taken away as potential evidence and thoroughly examined. Now, here is where things become stranger still. What could be recovered of the footage was one still image of Jennifer's abandoned bike and a series of ambiguous sounds, recording what may have been her final moments. So, what do you make of all this? Is there a homicidal lunatic lurking in those woods, attacking children who dare enter? Then why target young Jennifer, if she already lived there? Or is there truly a paranormal reason behind this? Is it the spirit of poor Nate bound to the forest? Or is it perhaps the one that targeted him all those years ago? Whatever the reason, everyone that has fallen prey to this disturbingly unfortunate job, all of those who have taken the challenge and disappeared as a result, are a part of it now. All pages in the legendary tale of Nathaniel Cooper, the Paperboy.